This is the Project Management Podcast. We bring project management topics to beginners and experts. Find us on the web at www.thepmpodcast.com or send your emails to pmpodcast@gmail.com. Hello and welcome to episode number 49. I am Cornelius Fichtner. This is the Project Management Podcast for the 16th of September 2006. A few episodes back, we heard from Kai Bevan and his experience of working as a project manager in a different culture, in Japan to be precise. Last week, we spoke with Tushara Wijewardena about the challenges she is facing in running a PMO in Sri Lanka. Today, we continue to look at international and intercultural project management. We are speaking with Richard Larson and Elizabeth Larson from Watermark Learning on the topic of projects without borders. The interview is about 35 minutes long, plus there is also a lot happening in my personal life this week, so there will not be any helpful resources for you this week. Well, actually, there is one, but I'll announce that after the interview, so you'll have to listen until then. Today's episode is sponsored by the University of California Irvine Extension. Better, faster, more. We hear this from our stakeholders every day. Do you have the tools to take on these demands? The University of California Irvine Extension Project Management Certificate Program can give you the knowledge to get your projects done on time, on budget. To learn more, visit www.extension.uci.edu/PM or call the United States at 949-824-7774. UCI Extension is a Project Management Global Charter member. As always with our sponsors, if you want to visit them, please click on their banner that is displayed on the pmpodcast.com. That way the sponsor knows that you have found them through us. And when you're at the website, check out the new poll that I have up. The poll asks how you listen to podcasts. Do you listen to podcasts on your MP3 player? Do you click on the podcast in a browser and then you use your computer speakers? Or maybe you use speakers and headphones with iTunes or speakers and headphones with Windows Media Player or maybe some other way. I'd appreciate it if you would let me know how you listen to the show, because that will allow me maybe to put in additional tools for you so that it's easier for you to download and listen to each episode. And also, of course, my weekly reminder, if you have a question about project management, please send me an email to pmpodcast@gmail.com and I will answer that question here on the program. Before we move on with the interview, I have an important technical announcement for you, and it has to do with the fact that I have to change the location of my RSS file. Let me try to explain to you what I'm doing in terms of radio. Let's say your favorite radio station is on the frequency 88.1. And one day, this radio station tells you, hey folks, we've been on 88.1 for all this time, and now we're going to have to switch to 95.7. So starting October 17th, please listen to us on the frequency 95.7. And that's exactly what I have to do. This RSS file of mine, which allows your software to automatically download this show, is going to have to move from my old location to the pmpodcast.com. Now, the reason why I'm doing this is because my old location, that server, is going to close down and I have to move everything away from there. Now, what does this mean for you? Well, if you just listen to the show by clicking onto the website and you listen through your speakers, you have absolutely nothing to do. You can continue to go to the pmpodcast.com and just click on the play podcast icons and it'll still play. But if you are subscribing to this show by using iTunes, Doppler, Juice, whatever the software is called that you're using to subscribe to this show, you're going to have to manually switch the subscription. Not in all cases. If you're using iTunes, for instance, nothing needs to be done. I've tested it out myself, and iTunes can automatically detect that I'm switching my file from point A over to point B. But if you're using any other kind of software, then you're going to have to make that switch manually. So please go to the website. I have a little article up there where I explain exactly what you would have to do and how you'd have to do it in order to make this switch. At this point, so to speak, we are currently broadcasting on both frequencies, so you can hear us on 88.1 and 95. What did I say? 7. So the old feed and the new feed already exist. Open up your podcatching software and check it out. If you are still on the old feed, it'll read the Project Management Podcast old feed. And if you are on the new feed, it'll read the Project Management Podcast. It's about as simple as that. I'll continue to make this announcement for the coming weeks, and the big switch happens on Tuesday, October 17th. Until then, you don't have to do anything, and if you're using iTunes, you don't have to do anything at all. And now, without any further ado, let's get going with today's interview. Enjoy.
Project Management Podcasts Feature Interview. Today, with Elizabeth Larson and Richard Larson from Watermark Learning.
Today I have the pleasure to have 2 interview guests with me here. That is as long as Skype holds up and we get around all these technical difficulties that we've been having so far. I have with me Elizabeth Larson and also Richard Larson. Elizabeth Larson is the co-principal of Watermark Learning and has been speaking and teaching in project management for over 25 years. Welcome to the program, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Hi.
And second, we have Richard Larson. He's also a co-principal of Watermark Learning, and he has over 30 years of speaking and teaching in project management and business analysis under his belt. A warm welcome to you as well, Richard.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Well, I'm very happy to have you, actually. Let me start with you, Elizabeth. Why don't you give our listeners a brief overview of your career?
My first full-time job was doing management consulting. I was working in a bank, working with KPMG to make recommendations to senior management. Great first full-time job. I was a business analyst for almost a decade and a project manager for almost 15 years at 3 different organizations. I was in IT as a project management, and I worked on very, very large projects introducing new technology and the associated business processes, most recently with Target stores. I joined Watermark, which Rich founded in 1992. I joined it in 1996 to bring some project management and business analysis training to Watermark. And as I tell people, I just love my job.
That's always a good thing if you're able to say that. And Rich, how did you get into project management, and how did that then lead to the founding of Watermark Learning?
Well, my first exposure to the field came over 30 years ago when I worked at a major bank as what was called then an EDP liaison, which today sounds kind of old-fashioned and outdated, but the work was exactly what a BA or business analyst does today. And to do that kind of work better, I wanted to enhance my technical skills, and so I went into application development for several years, and with each project, I tended to get more and more responsibility. I would take charge of all the projects it seemed I worked on and learned a lot about project management from making every mistake you could make in the book. And all those hard lessons and pain really led me to want to share my experiences with others, and so I moved into IT training. This turned out to be my real work passion, and 15 years ago, Watermark Learning started as a result of that. Now I can combine my years as a BA, PM, and in general business management every day, and it's very satisfying.
Our main topic today is going to be Projects Without Borders, which of course focuses mostly on intercultural projects, but we also want to talk about gathering requirements in multicultural projects. Now, let me start out with you, Elizabeth. Why is gathering requirements, why is it so difficult?
gathering requirements is very, very difficult for a number of reasons. There are a number of reasons that make it very, very hard to do. First of all, sometimes it's hard for our business clients and our sponsors to articulate exactly what they want. So as a business analyst, we need to ask the right questions. And that can be very, very difficult. Sometimes people present us with their solutions and tell us exactly how they want the product built. And that too presents a challenge because we need to step back and find out what business problem people want to solve. Sometimes it's difficult because there are just some situations where there are some things going on. What we do is cause change in organizations, and people can feel very threatened by change. Add on to it language barriers, communication barriers, cultural differences, and it becomes extremely challenging.
What kind of complications, then, does a multicultural environment add to these difficulties? Maybe, Richard, you want to take that?
Well, compounded on all, I think, is communication, to me, in addition to everything Elizabeth said, is also a major factor, because in trying to get clients to articulate those, which I do see as a huge huge stumbling block to even within the U.S. When you're going across cultures and across language barriers, it's difficult to align mental models enough when you speak the same language. But if English is a second language or not very well spoken, and we don't speak other countries' languages, add on to this the tight time frames that most projects have, and you have some major challenges. I think in addition to the language challenge, there are many cultural factors that may cause people not necessarily to open up and reveal requirements and discuss them in ways that we would normally want to get done, so that it may take many more meetings up front to establish a relationship, say, as one example, with cultures, for instance, in Asia, rather than Americans might want to get right to the point and dive into the requirements and get the job done, whereas another culture might be resisting that. And so cultural differences between different countries makes the process more challenging.
Now then, Elizabeth, what does that mean for a project manager? How do they overcome these difficulties, these challenges? What do I need to do in order to get my team onto one page, so to speak?
I think it is really important to establish the relationship. It's easier when project managers can meet face-to-face with the team members. We train in organizations where routinely project managers do go across seas to meet with the team members. We train in organizations where that is not viewed as feasible. There is absolutely no comparison in the stories that we hear between those that can meet and build a relationship and those that can't. If your organization absolutely won't send you overseas, there are still other ways that we can build teams and build relationships, but it's very difficult. In so many cultures, tasks get done not because it's a task on a work breakdown structure or on a timeline, on a project plan, but because of the relationship, because someone likes you, because they trust you. And I suppose we'll get into that a little bit more when we talk about trust. So it's very important, even if it takes time, even with tight deadlines, to build that relationship. Even if it's on the phone, in a chat room, through instant messaging.
I was just going to say, we have all these modern tools, instant messaging, emails, you can do video conferencing. Do these at all help in order to overcome at least the distance between cultural teams?
They help. They don't help as much or as quickly as face-to-face. But they help. I can't imagine. I think one of the reasons more people are working on more global projects and they are more successful is because we do have some of these tools. There is something about the face-to-face, even the video conferencing. I know when I used video conferencing as a project manager, not only because of the delay, the voice delay, but it was just really hard to read the nonverbals, which account for about 55% of the communication. Just harder. It's harder. It's not impossible. It's just more difficult. It takes more time.
So what can one do then as a project manager? I mean, you're faced with a multicultural international team and you have to bring them together somehow. What is the best way to do that, Rich?
Well, depending on your project budget, of course, the ultimate would be for the project manager to go overseas or to bring the team over to this country. One of our clients has a major growing presence in India where the company's employees are actually living in and working in India, and they bring them over to the U.S. once or maybe twice a year so that they get a chance to acculturate themselves into our environment. One of the challenges for them is that they don't have any equivalent type businesses in their country that they're trying to serve in this country. So the team members literally don't have any conception of what kind of business they're trying to support. So they literally, in that case, almost have to bring them over here to be a success. Another thing that people need to do is be more flexible. So instead of having a teleconference at 8 o'clock our time, which might be 2 a.m. at some other time zone, very inconvenient for the overseas person, is to be flexible and have teleconferences maybe a little bit earlier than you would normally do or stay later, maybe have them from home at 10 o'clock at night. I mean, these are getting to be more and more realities of working on multicultural projects.
Any other tips along those lines, shifting the time when you have your conferences? Are there any other ideas that project managers can use who are unable to go overseas or bring teams onshore?
I think it's really important to understand other cultures and spend some time learning about other cultures, about the differences in project management and how different cultures relate to different things like time and space and contracts and a whole multitude of differences. And I think teams need to be sensitive to each other. I also think it's really important to work towards collaboration and establish an environment of mutual understanding and mutual support. That's hard. It takes time. Again, if we have tight deadlines, we may need to step back and understand success criteria. Our deadlines, our timeframes, the only success criteria? And then spend the time to do some of the things that we're talking about. I would put it into my project plan. I would put that time, and I actually have put 5% of the total project time in for team building.
What kind of tools then would you suggest can be used in order to build this mutual understanding on the team and this trust?
There are some team building activities. I'm also suggesting that some time be spent understanding the differences in cultures. So if we're dealing with Asian people, what does that mean? There are a lot of really good books and a lot of really good classes on this topic. So that sensitivity is brought up. What does that mean for a project? Asia, Southeast Asia versus Ireland or versus the Mideast, as an example, and just understand those differences, be sensitive to it.
And I think the sensitivity extends to having an awareness, say, of holidays of the country that you're working on, so you don't schedule a meeting in the middle of a religious holiday. And just being aware of that is a small thing, but it shows respect for the other country, and I think that will go a long way no matter what country you're dealing with and what culture.
Let's move over from the actual cultural aspect of international projects to the question of, well, how do we gather requirements on an international project? Because that can be rather difficult as well. What kinds of difficulties have you come across, Richard?
Well, I think the language barriers, besides just the human interaction, which is really essential for eliciting the requirements, the recording and the documenting and the verifying them, we've recognized it and speak to this a lot, that some of the graphic models, such as use cases, data models, process models, bridge some of the language gap that words can never do. Because especially using universally recognized modeling conventions like UML would be a way to record and verify requirements that minimize use of language, therefore minimize some of the misunderstandings.
Be visual, in other words.
Yes, that's one significant way, because so much can be misunderstood in words.
Elizabeth, any roadblocks that you have come across and been able to move out of the way?
I too, when I've had people from different cultures on my project teams, definitely, as far as requirements, slightly different from project management, definitely using the modeling techniques. I really think that if we can graphically see the requirements and have a structure to ask the right questions, it helps break down the language barriers. I have found that to be successful. And I think we have both used variations of the RACI diagram to help spell out roles and responsibilities, which is really important. There are many, many layers of why that's important, but that helps as well. It's kind of visual, but it also helps us define who's responsible, who's going to be approving things and whatnot, regardless of language.
Richard, let's take the RACI chart that Elizabeth has just mentioned. Explain to the listeners, please, what the RACI chart will do on a project and how it can help to clarify on a worldwide team what people need to do.
Well, a great application of that, because as with any project or even any process, the RACI clearly spells out and documents decisions made about who does what. So, for instance, it would perhaps identify who would model process requirements, who would be responsible for managing risks or issues, and who ultimately makes decisions on various things. So that protocol is clear, because I think with any virtual team that's spread geographically, I think this is even more essential. So not just multicultural, but any non-co-located team needs this even more. I also think that in the U.S. we've got, in many cases, more of an informal culture where people don't want or maybe need things spelled out as much, and we find that people don't have things as clearly articulated. I think perhaps other cultures that we've worked with, particularly in Asia, have a more defined, what you might call hierarchy, where it's even more important to them to have things clear as to who's in charge, who's making decisions, who do you need to consult with, and so on. So I think they would appreciate the clarity that the RACI gives. And in fact, some of our U.S. colleagues almost seem to resent spelling things out. It's kind of ironic that way, but I think it would be a good thing overall, and could help clarify some possible misunderstandings and prevent them in advance.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you say that, because I recently did an interview with a gentleman who had experience, he's from Germany, had experience of project management in Japan, and he said that in his experience in Japan, requirements are often implied and not explicitly put to paper. What kind of suggestions would you have, Richard, for someone working in that kind of an environment? Because how do you get the requirements across a distance like that?
Well, if the culture is one of implication, if you will, I think you need to explain to stakeholders risks of not uncovering them, and to elicit the sponsor's aid in helping make that happen, because either the business analyst or the project manager, especially from overseas, is going to be perhaps the least adept at being able to cross those cultural barriers, and it's even more important to enlist the aid of the sponsor to help facilitate that. So just to recap, I think working in other countries, having assuming the sponsor is in the foreign country. Now you have another issue if the sponsor is domestic and working across the hall from you. Then, of course, you have to have some other perhaps non-U.S. based sponsor level to help with that. In other words, say somebody in Japan who could work with the stakeholders to explain the necessity of maybe overcoming some of that reticence. Because we've seen when requires are implied, people make assumptions, oftentimes get it wrong, and then we end up building the wrong solution, and therefore we have to come back and do the rework on it to get it to where it is correct. Elizabeth, do you have anything you could add to that?
the idea of high context versus low context, if you will, so that in Asia or in Japan, as an example, so much is implied. I also think that the idea of that you had mentioned of having someone, a partner, a counterpart, a sponsor, because there's also that hierarchy that's important too. So if you can get someone on board, I think that it's easier. I don't know though. It's a difficult issue, and it's one of those, however, that by working through other people, getting the information, then we can document it, we can model it, we can ask questions so it doesn't appear that there is that level of specificity that might make people uncomfortable. Did that make any sense at all, what I said?
Oh, yes, it did. I think what it basically boils down to is what we started out with. Trust. Yeah. Build trust, no matter where, in what culture you're in. Try to understand your project team, your project stakeholders, and build trust with them, no matter how you do it. Does that kind of sum it all up, really?
It does.
Yep.
It does. Now,
good summary.
Thank you. You have actually written an article about this, and it is titled Projects Without Borders, Gathering Requirements on a Multicultural Project. And I will put the link to that article into the show notes. And we haven't talked about this yet, but I suppose that Watermark Learning offers some kind of training in that direction as well, right? Richard, you want to answer that?
Sure. We offer a broad-based curriculum on eliciting, managing, documenting, verifying requirements, the whole gamut of requirements analysis that could be applied to multicultural projects. And our project management series of courses are well geared to working on the same thing, so that you bet we do offer a solution that could address these issues.
All right. Now, do we want to close this out? Have we not talked about anything yet? Is there anything that's missing, that we've skipped over, that you find is important that we come back to and that we review? Elizabeth?
Not from my perspective.
Not from yours? Richard? Anything that we've left out from your perspective?
Well, I think for U.S.-based people, perhaps we might sometimes have an attitude of, well, it's our project, therefore we assume everybody thinks the way we do. And one story from the article is kind of a funny one, that some project members from the U.S. were overseas, and they sent out an email talking about a restaurant where they said, don't forget, you can BYOB. And of course that's a well-known expression here in this country, but the Latin American team member said, "Who's BIOB? What? I'm confused." And he felt awkward having to bring that up. But this is kind of a funny little anecdote that we often, without even thinking about it, make assumptions about our perspective, and we need to try even harder with overseas or cross-cultural projects to make sure that we explain acronyms and assumptions and don't take anything for granted.
All right, thank you very much, Richard. We're going to do another interview in a few weeks, and we have decided that since I ask the same 10 questions at the end of every interview, it would be silly to ask twice the same 10 questions. So today we're going to start with the first 10 questions for Elizabeth. Elizabeth, are you ready for these?
Okay.
All right.
I am.
So, number 1, what was your favorite project?
My favorite project was a large project that we broke into smaller pieces, but a large project that I worked on at Target stores. It was called the Sales Promotion Project, and it was my favorite project because we had a fabulously engaged, strong sponsor. I had a strong, talented, very committed team, and I had the challenges of new technology, which were actually, I have to admit, kind of fun.
Number 2, what project would you like to have managed?
I have to say, in my almost 15 years that I tended to be the one to get the large projects introducing new technology, and I was always terrified of them to begin with. Oh, please, let me be number 2, not number 1. But I really always enjoyed them, and so I can't really say that, gee, I wish I could have had this other project to help me. I've just been very, very fortunate in my career.
Lucky.
Maybe a couple of easier ones, but no, I really have been very fortunate.
Number 3, what is your favorite project management book?
Oh boy. It really depends on my purpose for reading the project management book. I will admit that when I was studying for my PMP from PMI, I really did like Kersner's book. That was great. To my IT students, there's a wonderful book by Kathy Schwalbe that I recommend. They're just some wonderful books, and project management and 5 easy steps all the way to Kersner, everything in between. So I have some favorite requirements books too that I recommend, but those are a few for my project management.
Number 4, what is the topic of the next seminar that you are planning to attend?
Well, Rich and I are both going to be presenting at both the PMI Global Congress in Seattle in the fall and the IIBA, which is the International Institute of Business Analysis Conference in Orlando. And we're going to present 2 different papers, 2 different topics, but we also are going to check out other people's presentations and see what's new in our field. I particularly, lately there have been a lot of conferences or a lot of presentations dealing with relationships and trusts, and those are of particular interest to me, so I'll probably attend those.
Number 5, what is the best way to make a project fail?
Take ownership of the project yourself. And I have some scars to prove that. If we take ownership rather than having the sponsor own the project, then, and it falls on our shoulders, there are lots of reasons why that won't work. Another thing, and I've also gotten some scars on this one, is to concentrate too hard on the deadlines at the expense of the relationships. And that's why I now really find that the relationships are so important.
Number 6, how do you like to celebrate a successful project?
Oh boy, in a variety of different ways. I really do like to set success criteria at the beginning of the project, and success means so many different things to so many different people. I like to celebrate throughout the project. I also like to have a big celebration at the end, so I like both. And a celebration might just be an acknowledgement, a thank you, a recognition of someone. Or it might be, as an example, at the end of the sales promotion project, not only did we have a pizza lunch sponsored by our sponsor, we gave comp time, we went out for drinks and dinner, we gave gift certificates to the employees and to their spouses. There were just a whole bunch of things that we did in order to try and acknowledge people in different ways.
In your projects, number 7, in your projects, where do you focus most of your attention in order to be successful?
I focused mainly on, besides, once I learned, really being a partner with my sponsor, really focusing on that relationship as well as with the team members. I focus a lot on scope. That to me is really, really important, to nail down the scope, because from my scope, from my deliverables come my estimates, my schedule, and it just helps me. I really like to manage scope because I think it's very, very easy for a project to get out of control. I like to also then manage the triple constraints. I like the sponsor to approve changes in scope. I like to talk then what that means to the project. I have also found, relating to scope, time boxing is really important so that I'm not trying to bite off something that's too big at one time, and produce deliverables as I go along.
Number 8, if you weren't a project manager, what would you like to be?
Well, as I said, I really have the ideal job. I love what I do, and after 15 years, I'm very, very happy to help other people, to mentor people, to train them. And so I would do what I'm doing now, which I love.
Good. Number 9, what is the one thing that a project manager cannot live without?
That's an engaged sponsor.
And finally, Number 10, the oldest question in project management. What is more important in a project manager? Is it project management expertise or is it industry expertise?
And this is very, very difficult. It's almost like I feel asking me, would I rather be killed with a lethal injection or hanged? I don't really want to have to make that choice. But if I had to choose, and this is hard, if I had to choose, I would pick the project management experience. Reluctantly, but I would pick that one. Because I think we do need to know the processes for managing a project, and we can learn the industry. We can count on our business experts and our sponsor for the industry expert. It's a tough choice, though.
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth. Thank you very much, Richard. It has been an absolute pleasure to having had you on the program today.
Well, thank you very much. It's been delightful being here.
Same here, Cornelius. Thank you much.
And that was our interview with Elizabeth Larson and Richard Larson from Watermark Learning. The interview, by the way, was inspired by an article of theirs in Computer World titled Project Without Borders, Gathering Requirements on a Multicultural Project. You can find a link to this article in the Helpful Resources section of today's episode. Yes, this is the promised helpful resource. Go to thepmpodcast.com, click on today's episodes and look for the Helpful Resources link at the bottom of the text. Richard and Elizabeth, by the way, they will be back in a few weeks and we will continue to look at the difficulty of gathering requirements in general. Let me remind you, of course, also that you will find a link to purchase the books that any of our interview guests mention also in the Helpful Resources section categorized on the books on the website. If you click on those links and you decide to purchase one of those books, the commission that gets paid to us helps us to keep the cost of the program a bit lower. And now, since this is the 49th episode, next week's episode must be, yes, the 50th. And I want you all to tune in, and we will be celebrating not just the 50th episode, but also 1 year on air, so to speak. And our guest is none other than Max Weidman. Yeah, that's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at www.thepmpodcast.com, or you can send your emails to pmpodcast@gmail.com. And when you write, please tell me where in the world you are writing from. And when you stop by at thepmpodcast.com, please don't forget to click on the link labeled PM Templates to increase your productivity. These are best practice templates that will benefit your project. And finally, we have this. The more ridiculous the deadline, the more money will be wasted in trying to meet it. Until next time.